some might tell me that is called work. To me, it isn't work, at least not the kind of work that I respect, but rather, it's toxic behavior. Nonetheless, I realized that who someone pairs up with is not up to me. And why should I care when I don't know these people? In the midst of my drunken rage, I began to calm down and feel a sense of relief that I was now no longer having to worry about having to deal with PEOPLE. I remembered that I was learning to no longer give a shit what people think of me or even how my behavior affected others. At that moment, I felt a sense of euphoria more powerful than any orgasm I had ever had. But the euphoria was short lived, and the next morning, I woke up with a nasty hangover and went into a fit of rage where I said some massively offensive things to John. I explained to him all the rage I had been feeling and how I didn't appreciate how the Portland woman acted or having my interactions with others policed. I also didn't like the sight of having to see people that I perceived as FDs with women at the concert the night before. All of which he seemed to understand. However, there was one problem. Catalina was going to find out about it, and understandably, she would be really pissed off about it. She told me that I needed to get serious mental help with focus on emotion regulation, which I promised her I would. I felt fucking terrible. My frustration with John and my life, in general, had boiled to the point that I had hurt someone I didn't intend to hurt and whom I respected. I wrote her a long apology which she accepted, but I knew the healing would take time. Later, when I discussed the incident with my therapist, she brought to light the question of why do I care who's dating who? And she had a point. I will admit that it is jealousy and that on that particular night, have ing the experience of going through an insulting rejection, having my interactions policed, and witnessing FDs picking up women within the span of a few hours pushed me off the deep end. But at the end of the day, I can't travel inside someone else's head and tell them who they can like or be attracted to. However, I realized that what I could do was simply write it all off and put them in boxes. Many people tell me that putting people in boxes is unhealthy, but I came to realize that it helped calm much of my social frustrations. For example, when I witnessed someone that I perceived as an FD with a beautiful woman, rather than getting filled with jealousy and rage, I could simply tell myself, "K, that guy's a dipshit, and that woman's a skank for pairing up with him." It's resentful and often civ. I know. But it calmed my angst-ridden brain down. The following month, a tragic event occurred, which brought John and me together. A friend of mine from RTC named Dom Calada was killed while serving as a Pierce County deputy during an arrest in Edgewood. The shooter was killed as well, and his partner was wounded. Dom had survived 4 deployments, 2 to Iraq and 2 to Afghanistan, only to be killed while serving as a cop in his home country. To both of us, it was beyond depressing. However, we made a point of attending his memorial service, which was quite moving. I hadn't cried in public in nearly 25 years, but I did that day. Afterward, John began to make an effort to be less of a rage trigger for me, and vice versa. He also had me back on his podcast to discuss relationships and many of the themes of this book right here. I also got a chance to ask him what the secret to his success in his relationship was, and he replied with mutual understanding and Daryl Jeffers N. Musings F. An Autistic Mind. 46. 47. Good communication. I figured that with Catalina, John was finally on the right track and was looking forward to seeing them marry. Now it was my turn to get on the same track. And on top of that, I saw John as someone I could vent to in a way that I couldn't vent to others. And let's face it, we all need that friend. Looking through pop culture, I have wondered what movie or TV show represents our friendship. Any could be Beavis and Butt Head, with John being Butthead and me being Beavis. The Netflix series Atypical. is another good comparison with him being Zahid and me being Sam, especially considering that this show deals with an Aspie who struggles socially and Zahid is the guy who tries to help him improve that. Another could be planes, trains, and automobiles, with me being Steve Martin and John being a more vulgar version of John Candy. I also could see the Harold and Kumar films represent ANGS, with me being Harold and him being Kumar. Similarly to Dan, I have compared Fight Club to our friendship, with him being Brad Pitt and me being Edward Norton. Their film comparisons include Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, him being Brad Pitt and me being Leonardo DiCaprio, and The Banshees of Inisherin. Either of us could be either Colin Farrell or Brendan Gleeson in that one. But I think the film that represents our friendship the most would be the 2004 buddy comedy Sideways starring Paul Giamatti and Thomas Hayden Church, with me being Giamatti and him being Church. The film deals with a failed and recently divorced novelist, Giamatti, taking his friend, Church, up to Santa Barbara for his bachelor party, and a series of shenanigans ensue. Jake has been a friend of mine since I met him in drama class my sophomore year, which was his freshman year of high school. As far as relationships are concerned, I have never felt the sense of jealousy toward him that I felt toward John and others. In fact, many of Jake's relationships actually made me appreciate being single. However, what I didn't realize for many years was that while I was sitting on the sidelines pitying him, Jake was learning all kinds of things about women, relationships, and communication that I am still learning in my 30s. All these experiences led him to meet a woman named Lauren in his 30s. Jake has never been so much a rage trigger as he has been a curiosity trigger in the sense that he is awkward, slow, and resentful of others, just like me. However, unlike me, he has always had a higher level of self-confidence, sometimes to the point of coming across as cocky and arrogant, has better social skills, and gets out more. To me, this seemed like a contradictory personality. But it was a fascinating trait. But I should start with the first relationship I remember him having in high school with a girl named Stacy. For a while, their relationship seemed to be going just fine. Stacy was always Jake's gem, and they would do just about everything together. From what I observed, they had a strong sense of understanding and communication. They also gave me some good advice on how to deal with many of the failed crushes I was going through. Eventually, they broke up, and it seemed to be going fine. However, then some drama happened, and the two became bitter enemies. I can't remember the full details, but she started telling Jake that she still had feelings for him, and then it turned out she was simply using him for some stupid prank. I learned that people aren't always what they appear to be. And sometimes, they will give you ugly surprises. But Jake developed a lot from this experience. Soon afterward, Jake began a relationship with another high school friend named Mary. This relationship proved to be one of the more toxic ones and, in many ways, made me appreciate being single. However, he ended up marrying her and had 2 children. He stayed married to her for the entirety of his time in the army, and whenever I went over to visit them, I would notice her being very controlling of him and wanting him to do everything for her. To me, she came across as a control freak and a needy Nancy. In some cases, she would even do the same toward me when I visited them. However, Jake remained married to her for the duration of his time in the army, and it was not until he switched over to the National Guard that the marriage seemed to come apart. When he first switched over to the Guard in 2016, he moved out of the house he was living in with Mary and was Daryl Jeffers N. Musings F. An Autistic Mind. 48. 49. Planning to file for a divorce. During this time, he had a relationship with a woman up in Gig Harbor and was living primarily out of a van he shared with her while couch hopping with friends. Initially, this relationship seemed to be going well, and he indicated a desire to marry her. However, after a series of arguments and irreconcilable differences, He broke up with her in November of 16 before even truly getting back with Mary in April of 17. NCE again, I learned that people and situations are not always what they appear to be. He remained with Mary for another 2.5 years before finally, in November of 2019, he left her for another woman named Lauren. He immediately filed for divorce, but it was not finalized until February of 2021, around the same time he left the National Guard. He later told me he would be having a son with her. While I have only met her a few times, I have observed a good rapport between them and that they are able to communicate their needs to each other very well. This was especially true in August of 2022 when I helped them move out of their apartment into a house a few blocks away. It was the first time I got a chance to interact with Lauren, and she was a lot more laid back than Jake's, now ex-wife, and even helped us out with the move. Understanding and communication are quite possibly the two most important elements of a successful relationship. I later asked Jake what the source of his confidence was, and he replied simply with not giving a shit what most people think of me. Craig: I met Craig while working at a warehouse in Fife called Animal Supply Company. He was a black man who was born in Africa but raised in Tacoma. At the time, he had just left the Marine Corps. I wasn't interested in making friends at a warehouse job, as I saw it as another draw for FDs and another job where every conversation seemed to revolve around shitting, fucking, or getting drunk all the time. However, Craig caught on to me in the sense that he was very street smart and had a lot of useful advice on women. He was also one of those rare people who could be cocky and actually pulled it off, i.e., not be cocky in a rage-triggering way. He was willing to acknowledge that even though he was highly successful in certain areas, getting laid, manipulation, talking up a good line, not everyone else was, and he didn't berate those who weren't or pretend to act all shocked by them. He and I would go out drinking after work, and he later became a valuable asset in my VA disability claims, which amounted to 80%, as of this writing, in the sense that he told me how to present my case to the VS, Veteran Service FICER, and how to file it as well. We also connected in the sense that he was able to give me straight answers to a lot of my random questions about life and people. After the George Floyd protests occurred, I sometimes turned to him to make sense of controversial issues like racism. He explained that racism was a horrible thing, but that people were going to spin it any way they could. Many of those people had little knowledge or experience of the issue to begin with. Dan: I first met Dan in October of 2010 while in the army after he had just arrived in Baumholder, Germany, shortly before our Afghanistan deployment. At the time, he was still married to a woman he had met while stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, back in 2005, but was given a hall pass for his time in Germany. He told me that he had a long history of picking up girls and claimed to have a sex partner tally of around 80. I struggled with acne as a kid, but then I made some self-improvements, lost my virginity at 12, and went through a phase of putting my penis everywhere I could, he explained. For the course of my time in Germany, I got to know him quite well as he was my NC, non-commissioned officer, in charge of me, and soon became the only friend I had. He had extensive combat experience from a tour in Iraq as well as a previous tour in Afghanistan and was quite helpful in helping me learn my job. I was a fire support specialist at the time. During our time in Germany, Dan engaged in two casual relationships, which I had become jealous of but learned a lot from observing. The first occurred in early 2011 with a German woman named Anna, whom he had met while hanging out in the barracks. Daryl Jeffers N. Musings: F. An Autistic Mind. 50. 51. Anna had an American military fetish in the sense that she saw American soldiers as badasses and wanted one for a husband. He later told me that by displaying a decent amount of confidence, he managed to win her over. He told me that sex with her was epic, but that he wanted to keep it casual. However, this proved to be much tougher than he had anticipated. The woman developed an obsession with him that turned into a fatal attraction type of situation where she would harass him, call him at inappropriate times, and even once try to friend me on Facebook with the intention of using me to get to him. She likely saw me as a desperate dork that she could manipulate in her favor. Eventually, however, Dan was able to convince her to leave him and stop hanging out with American soldiers. But there was a very important lesson to be learned. Be careful where you put your penis, and know that when you play with fire, you get burned. For the rest of the year, we were deployed to Afghanistan, where Dan gave me a long set of advice on women, how to impress them, how to talk to them, and how to get out of the friend zone, which I still struggle with to this day. And New Year's Eve 2011, we put this to use when we ran into a couple of drunk American college girls at a bar in Paris, and I put to use much of the advice he had given me. This includes very specific advice on posture and conversation topics. I told her about all the places I had traveled to, and she seemed quite impressed. We didn't get any that night, thanks to the cock-blocking French assholes, including one who roofied her drink, but I could tell she was attracted to me, even if it were only for a brief moment. And that alone was a confidence booster for me. And that same trip, I introduced him to my dad and stepmom, who had arranged for us to stay at a condo in the city. Both seemed to like him and thanked him for looking out for me in Afghanistan. The following year, we had to limit how much we hung out together as I was still a junior enlisted soldier and he was an NC, but he had told me that he got into another casual relationship with a female soldier. I tried to tell him that it wasn't a good idea, but that didn't rest well with him, so I just let it unfold as it needed to. While he was milking this relationship for what it was worth, I was going to the brothels every chance I got as if I was trying to one-up him. At one point, he told me he was planning to divorce his wife. However, a few weeks before my time in Germany ended, the relationship came to an end when a soldier who identified as homosexual stepped in and began saying negative things about Dan toward his new girlfriend. This Dan and his once good friend, whom he would jokingly call his little sis, into bitter enemies. And things only got worse a month later. By this point, I had left Germany and was now at Bragg, when Dan was given Article 15, a form of non-judicial punishment that is given when soldiers fuck up, and in November of 2012, he left the army for good. I often compared our friendship to the 1999 cult classic Fight Club, with him being Brad Pitt and me being Edward Norton. In the years following the army, Dan became a firefighter and gradually repaired his relationship with his wife. He also had a son. He had a daughter while at JBLM, and was raising his 2 kids in Kentucky. After a while, however, the marriage fell apart, and they were divorced. However, Dan got a new girlfriend to whom he would propose, and as of this writing, he is still planning a date for the wedding. He referred to his first marriage as just being a contract marriage. After nearly 10 years of not seeing each other in person, we reunited at the Steilacoom pub in 2022. I even got Daryl Jeffers N. Musings F. An Autistic Mind.